Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the first session of the series of webinars that will discuss the impact of COVID-19 on regional and urban economics. This pandemic has severely hit almost every country and economic sector, and cities and our urban models have been the most affected. The sessions aim to open the mind to pros and cons, doubts, risks, and opportunities arising from the current moment of change, recognizing their uncertainties, and to share thoughts and reflections in a disruptive moment. Today, this first session will be focused on the city as environment of prosperity from two different perspectives, the epidemiological and pandemic, and as a pole of economic activity in terms of economies of agglomeration. I'm pleased to open this cycle with the presence of two first-rate speakers, Dr. Joan Clos and Dr. Marc Nieuwenhuizen. Let me say that one of the most popular events organized by the Economists Association of Catalonia is the Annual Day of Economists. The conference held in Barcelona in 2018 had as its motto, City and Innovation, a space for growth and creativity. Precisely, our guest today, Joan Clos, gave the inaugural lecture of the conference, which focused on city and innovation, city and prosperity, and which served as a framework for raising the great urban challenges facing the humanity in the coming decades, emphasizing the need to connect urbanism with economic and demographic requirements. Also in 2018, the other guest, Marc, Director of Urban Planning, Environment and Health at IAS Global Barcelona, received the John Goldsmith Award, the highest distinction in the field of environmental epidemiology, in recognition of his work in favor of healthier cities, awarded annually by the International Society for Environmental Epidemiology. So, Miquel Morell will be the moderator, and Nieves Cosials will conduct the virtual chat. So, Miquel, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Anton, for your welcome. And as you have said, the first session of this cycle of conference, we are going to talk about health and cities, and with two key experts, Dr. Joan Clos and Marc Nieuwenhuizen. And before opening the dialogue, I would like to complete the presentation of Dr. Joan Clos and Marc Nieuwenhuizen. Dr. Joan Clos has been the mayor of Barcelona between 1997 and 2006. And after this, between 2010 and 2017, Joan Clos was the executive director of UN Habitat, the United Nations program responsible for promoting sustainable, resilient, and prosperous cities. And during his tenure, he led the elaboration of the new urban agenda and was named as the Secretary General of the Habitat 3 Conference. Thank you very much, Joan, for being with us today. And also, Marc Nieuwenhuizen is nowadays, as Anton has said, the Director of Urban Planning, Environment and Health at IAS Global Barcelona. And Marc is a world-leading expert in environmental exposure assessment, epidemiology, and health, risk, and impact assessment, with a strong focus and interest on healthy urban living. He studies the relationship between urban and transport planning and health. I have to say that in both years, 2018 and 2019, Marc, he was among the first percent, the 1% between most cited scientists in the world. So thank you, Marc, for being here with us.
Great to be here.
Before I start the dialogue and the questions, I would like to say to the audience that we have prepared a list of questions to share with both panelists, and I think that this dialogue can be destined more or less 30-40 minutes, and after that you will see through Zoom, the audience can write during our conversation some questions that will be managed by Maria Nieves Cosiais, a member of the Regional and Urban Economics of the Association of Economists of Catalonia. And before ending the conversation, we will try to expose and translate some questions to Joan and Marc from the audience. The audience can write the questions in Catalan, in Spanish, or in English, and Nieves will translate it to the panelists. They have to write the questions in the icon that is called, in Spanish, preguntas y respuestas, and in English, I think that questions and answers, okay? So let's begin with the talking. And only to begin with, I would like to ask some general questions, one general question to Marc and Joan, that in the last 30 years, we have faced new normalities. More or less, every 10 years, we have been facing new normalities. And finally, from my personal point of view, I think that have been new normalities very similar to the previous ones. So only to begin with, do you think that really we are facing a really structural change linked to a health, to a threatened health, and even more if we live in urban agglomerations? If you want, Joan, could you please answer this first question and then completed by Marc?
Yes. Well, I think that we tend to consider everything thing that happens as something new, as something that never has happened. Of course, we don't know the future. Therefore, the future is always, some kind of uncertainty. But if we look at history, we clearly detect some patterns that they tend to repeat, although in a variance in relation to the past ones. And by the way, this is what has happened in the urban history in relation to epidemics. In urban history, we have had huge epidemics, much more deadly than the one that are having now, and which have choked the urban reality much more than the one that we are currently going through. We had the flu epidemic of 1918. We had the Hong Kong flu. We had the Asian flu. We had the cholera epidemics, yellow fever epidemics, which were much more deadly than the ones that we are facing now. The issue now is that, fortunately, if you want, we are in an open society and information flows much better, and therefore the people is more aware of what is happening. But it's not by far the most deadly epidemic that we have seen in the previous urban history.
Marc, do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, so that I agree with Joan. So that's what we've seen, and we've got nowadays also much more knowledge of what needs to be done. I mean, in the past also we changed our cities a bit in response to epidemics. I mean, for example, the example in Barcelona was built to get away from the very cramped city, the old city, to let in more fresh air and make it much healthier. At the moment, what we see in response to the coronavirus, we know that two things work quite well. First of all, the hygiene measures, washing your hands and this kind of things. The other, I mean, is the physical distancing. And in this way, the coronavirus is probably going to stay around for the next year or two. I mean, I don't know how quickly we're going to find something, a vaccine or some other way to get rid of it, but or maybe even stay longer. So what we're going to have in place probably is this physical distancing measures. And in that way, we need to adapt to cities that people can keep distances. And as a response to that, what we find now is that there may not be enough public space for people. And so I can see that there may be some changes taking place where we create more public space for people that people can keep the distance. This is also in terms of saying having restaurants outside, but also for people to walk around in the city. and also the need for more green spaces, for more parks in cities that people can relax a little bit more. And so it may be that we're going to see changes in cities for the better. I mean, we know here in Catalonia, there are many cities now that are introducing more cycling lanes. And we know that cycling is very healthy for people. It's a good form of transport to get around. And I sincerely hope that some of these changes actually stay for the longer term, and to create not only that a healthier population, but also more a sustainable and livable city.
Thank you, Mark. The next question is especially for Mark, but also Joan, if you want to complete after, it will be a pleasure. Today, we are currently oversaturated with information about health in cities, okay? And I would like to ask Mark, if in a few words, what do we mean when we talk about health in terms of city, urban planning and urban models? And if we can cite a few simple concepts when we talk about health in cities, what are we talking about?
So I think when a lot of people think about health, they think about health systems, hospitals. And I think what you see, for example, cities are great places because there are often many hospitals. There's much more better accessibility to healthcare for people. So and that's one of the attractions of cities. People love to live in cities for many different reasons, but also having access to healthcare is very important. You know, when we think about health, we think about physical health, having disease or not, or preferably not, but also mental health. I think it's nowadays quite important. What we see in cities is that there are different types of cities. I mean, here in Europe, in particular also here in Catalonia, we see often quite compact cities where it's fairly easy to get around, walking. Distances are short. I mean, if you go to the rest of the world, to the US or Australia, you see sprawled cities. Many people have to use the car to get around. People live far away from where they work. I mean, it tends to be different here. What we know now is that how you design cities and how people get around is very much affected, also very much affect health. So for example, if you design and invest in a city where what's very sprawled, where a lot of people have to use the car to get around, you get quite a lot of also air pollution, you get a lot of noise, people don't get enough physical activity, there are not many social contacts, and there may not be enough space for green space. And so we find that, you know, this affects health and causes disease and premature mortality. On the other side, when you have more compact cities where people actually can walk around or cycle around and don't have to rely on the car, for example, this may be much healthier because it gives people opportunities to do physical activity, doesn't create air pollution, doesn't create noise. We also have more space for green space, and also we can reduce heat island effects, what are often important, in particular in warmer countries. And so this way, these are forms where we can promote health. Now we're in Barcelona. Unfortunately, Barcelona is a compact city, but we still have some problems with that. There are too many cars around in terms of mobility. And I think that's what we need to address a bit more and rebalance. So we have actually more public space and more space for people and perhaps a little bit less for cars, so we can create a healthier population.
Okay. But we will talk about mobility after, so don't hesitate that we will talk about that.
I will come back to that. I've got more to say.
John, I don't know if you want to say something or we can...
Well, yes, there are some, in epidemiological terms, there are some indicators about the evolution of the health in populations. No? And we know that hygiene during the 19th century was, especially as Mark has said, during the period of the 1850s, where Barcelona was expanded or where London was Asianized, that a huge improvements in mortality rates were done thanks to the hygiene measures. Introducing clean water, separation of clean and dark water at households, and all these kind of things. Also, then during the 20th century, it was very important, the control of infectious disease, bacterial disease mainly. But as we have seen now in our own experience, we should remember that viruses are here with us, and therefore we have had this huge issue with an infectious disease, which is something that this is why the people is so surprised about what is going on. But what we can say clearly is that the life expectancy has improved in a manner that humanity has never seen. We have now countries like Spain or Japan or most of the Europeans that where our life expectancy now is over 80 in both men and women, a little bit more for women. That means that we have reached a point that in the past history of humanity, we never reached. And this has something to do with urban life, by the way, because most of those improvements, they are thanks to the knowledge and scientific advances that they were mainly done through the urbanization process. Therefore, you know, I think that this is an underlying reality that I think that this epidemic is not going to change. The improvements of life expectancy are going to continue in spite of this epidemic. But that is related to quite a number of different aspects of knowledge that we are applying to different branches of medicine and health services and social well-being. Therefore, I think that this is going to be remembered as a specific event. Like now, nearly nobody remembers about the Asian flu of 1968. Do you remember the Asian flu of 1968? And do you know how many people died in the world of the Asian flu in 1968? Much more, by the way, than the people dying now. And therefore, this talk about that everything is going to be very different, you know, from the future, I don't sincerely think that this is going to affect much of the positive evolution that we were achieving, not only in infectious disease, but, and this is where Mark enters, in non-infectious disease. Because what epidemiology has been able to understand is the health factors contributing to chronic diseases like, you know, myocardial infarct or stroke or diabetes or other killing illnesses of the nowadays. Therefore, this is going to pass as an infectious disease outbreak, which probably will, I don't know how many dead people is going to be in the world. Let's assume double the one that we have now. Let's assume 1 million persons dying of this outbreak. But remember that the flu of 1918 killed 60 million people. We are different of nearly different magnitudes, different scales of magnitudes. And remember that the 60 million of people in 1918 was in a world population that was 1/3, less than 1/3, than the one that we have now. That means that the incidence, it was much higher than, you know, our current outbreak in terms of worldwide epidemics. It's, you know, not a very important one. although of course it has introduced a lot of pain, suffering and death, but this is something that our society should be more prepared. And one of the failing aspects of the system that we have foreseen during these epidemics is not only some difficulties in the assistential medicine. What we have, the biggest failure has been in public health and epidemic health, epidemiology and public health services, which in most of the countries except Germany and Korea and perhaps Vietnam and a little bit in Germany, in the rest of the countries, the public health services, they have been, awfully organized to prepare for this outbreak.
Joan, let's talk a little bit of how do we make compatible the concept of economies of agglomeration versus health cities that we are now with information and we are obliged to keep distance between us, and economies of agglomeration are about concentration, economies of scale and densification. And the question is, how do we manage to guarantee both needs? And the only alternative that we have is to live massively in low density. Is that the only alternative? Because I would like to hear from you that it's...
What do you mean massively in low density? This looks like an oxymoron. You mean most of us living in a sprawl city of low density? Well, I don't believe that this is going to be the future. What we are seeing now is that most of the knowledge is concentrating in hubs, in cities, in density hubs. The most dense hubs are where usually most of the highest rate of information transference. And that means that this is why the salaries, for example, in these hubs, they are much higher than in rural areas. And this is something that economically probably will subsist. Perhaps there's going to be a little moderation, but I don't think that we can finish with agglomeration economics. I think that agglomeration economics are here with us mainly, and this is a structural aspect, they are more productive. That's to say, they deliver more with less resources. Therefore, there's a general tendency to the economies of agglomeration, especially in the poor countries, which they need to be more productive. Then one should look at the economies of agglomeration in terms of productivity, cost versus output. And in that sense, I think that this is going to be a law that will continue to apply in the next decades. Another thing is that we can improve the health in cities. We can improve the health in cities. Of course, fighting against climate change, substituting fossil fuels, introducing taxes on carbon economy. There are many ways that we can improve the remaining problems of health in the cities. And even we can introduce social stability in the cities, because there's a high risk that the city is not going to fail because of its economics. The high risk is that the city fails for its differences, these disparities, different levels of wealth. But that can also be addressed in the city. Therefore, I think that the way forward is going to be to improve the health on the city, and whatever form of health can be improved, not just infectious disease, chronic disease, exercise, good, healthy environment, noise, etc.
Okay, Mark, let's
Yeah,
talk about.
perhaps I can add a little bit to that. It's also because, you know, there are big problems with the sprawled city where you say there's low density, partly because of the, what Johan mentioned, you know, climate change issues. I mean, there's a huge CO2 emissions from that. I mean, how you get around, etc. And climate change is a very big issue for health as well. I mean, we really need to cut our emissions at the moment. Also, what Johan referred to before, I mean, you know, density is not really the problem. One thing what maybe, or what seems to be the problem is not being prepared, and also the deterioration of the public health system. I mean, if you look at a city, a place like Hong Kong, they have very few cases of coronavirus, partly because of very well prepared, because of the previous SARS crisis. And also they have a fairly good public health system that's picking up. I mean, and over the many years now, we've been, you know, cutting down on health in a way, focusing on other things rather than public health. And we see that in many places around the world, where there is not enough money going into the public health to set up a good surveillance system. We started too late here and many other places. We thought it was not going to happen. It's happening in China. We're not prepared. But if we would have been prepared, you know, shut down earlier on, do the track and tracing of the virus, that would have saved a lot of problems, what we've seen so far. And I don't know if you saw today, New Zealand is the first country to have no new cases anymore. They started fairly early on, even before they detected any cases. And now they're out of it. And you can't travel to New Zealand at the moment because they don't want you to take the virus there. But, you know, it's a country where there is no virus around it anymore. Being well prepared, taking the right measures right in the right time. So I think there are ways to address this, and I'm sure we're going to be much better prepared for the next wave. We know what to do. We need to have the money to improve the systems to be able to do that. And but still, the city where we live in, compact cities, are very good for many other reasons. And I think the other thing is to remember, we're talking about infectious disease that's killing now some people. We have to remember that there are other problems like air pollution that kill around 7 million people per year around the world, including 600 here in Barcelona each year. So in the Barcelona city itself, you know, and we need to address that as well, because this is something also that happens year after year.
But let's talk about a little bit of the mobility issue. Let's suppose that the decision parameters of a standard family of residential and relocation could change a little bit with an increase of flows in the surroundings of the metropolitan areas. Okay, what are the challenges for passenger mobility in that case, and if the pandemic should improve or should change the mobility parameters that we are used to?
Yeah. So I think my personal view is that what we have, if we look only at Barcelona city, we do quite well in terms of mobility. You know, the mode share, what we have. I mean, the mode share of cars is relatively small compared to other much more beneficial mode shares like public transport and active transportation. The problem what we have is with the metropolitan area, that many people need to use the car to come into the city. And what creates problem also for the city. So I think what we're lacking is a very good public transport system for the whole metropolitan area that can, you know, provide very good transport for everyone in the metropolitan area, and that you get easily around. I mean, of course, public transport at the moment doesn't have a good name. People are a bit worried going in there. But actually, you can solve these. I mean, and that's what Johan said before. I mean, the virus will go away. We will go back to normal. But even currently with the public transport system, if you have very good ventilation inside, people take some hygiene measures, it's pretty safe to be in public transport. But what you don't need to have is public transport for sardinas. What I always say, you need to try to avoid that. So I'm a strong believer that we need to put more investment into public transport for the whole metropolitan area. But at the same time, think about other solutions as well that, for example, increase more the cycling lanes. At the moment, it's quite difficult to cycle throughout the whole metropolitan area without being interrupted. Now I'm a bit biased. I'm coming from Holland. I'm coming from a cycling country. I love cycling. I see more people cycling here in the city. Myself, I live in Poblenou. They put in a lot of cycling lanes and there are many people cycling now, many more than before. And I'm a strong believer that if you put in more cycling lanes, you get more people cycling. I'm hoping to see in the future that there is going to be cycling lanes for the whole of the metropolitan area, that it would be easy to cycle from Terrassa to Barcelona with your bicycle. Now you say, I'm never going to do that on my normal bicycle, but nowadays there are electric bicycles and they seem to work very well for long distances. And, you know, this kind of cycling also has the advantage that you get physical activity. Lack of physical activity is one of our main killers in society. Many premature deaths are related to that. A lot of time, people don't have time to do physical activity. They can't go to the gym, you know, they're busy working. But I always say, you know, when you commute to work, if you do that on your bike or you walk, you build in physical activity. I mean, that's of your daily, you need to go to work anyway. So let's build it into your daily life, and that makes it better. It's better than sitting in the car, for example. Also, there is no air pollution, no noise. And so there are a number of these advantages that you actually can get. Also, no CO2 emissions. Okay. That would be quite beneficial.
I just only
waiting to talk there.
I only think that there's one thing with higher priority than cycling.
Walking.
And it's walking.
Definitely, I fully agree.
Walking.
Yeah.
And you know, the aceras, the sideways. That it's even more important than cycling.
Definitely,
because,
I fully agree.
This is one of the assets of the Mediterranean city, that our share of walking in terms of the total number of trips a day, it's very high. It's nearly 45, 46%. And this is a huge capital that we have inbuilt in our urban model. Think that there are cities in cold countries or, you know, in more difficult geographies where walking is impossible because of the weather or because of safety issues.
Yeah.
Then walking, it should be the first line of priority. Because walking can be done nearly in all the ages of the people. And therefore walking, but in order to favor the walking abilities in a city, you need to design properly the walk sides, the aceras. Then, and then we need to design very carefully the interface between cycling lines and walking lines in order to avoid conflict of interest in these two priorities. Remembering always that walking is first.
I'm sorry, but we have to walk through the conversation.
But I mean, it's a very important point that Joanna's making. You know, there's a transport pyramid, and on the top of what we need to have first, prioritize things for walking, cycling, public transport, and after that, I think the motorized cars and motorbikes.
Joan, one question especially for you. From your point of view, what are the implications of the pandemic and coronavirus for the implementation of the new urban agenda that you have do we have to change it, or do we have to execute it more?
I've been reading it throughout it again during those days of confinement, and I can assure you that it's fully online. That the only thing that is needed is to believe on it and do what you know it's implied on its basis, on its, you know, because all of these things that we have been talking here are the basic pillars of the new urban agenda. Then don't increase unnecessarily the sprawl. Don't plan urbanistic measures which will increase the demand for mobility. Just do the contrary. Use urban planning to reduce the demand of mobility, not just the service of mobility. We need to approach to the issue of mobility first and overall through measures to diminish the demand to mobility. That means to integrate jobs nearby where people live. Okay, that in order that they can go walking or cycling. And this goes against all the urbanism that has been done in the world in the last 30 years, or 40 or 50 years, where zoning, saying this part of the city is going to be an industrial park, this other part of the city is going to be an amusement park, this other third part of the city is going to be a residential park. This hyper-zoning is on the basis of the high demand of mobility. We need to plan cities with a more integrated activities where jobs, amusement, sports, and life and housing can be nearby. And that means a huge crisis on urban zoning and total review necessary in urban zoning, which is a paradigm change, because urban zoning is something of the 20th century. Then urbanism now it's facing two huge challenges and change of paradigm. The car, which is a technology of the 20th century, and zoning, which is another tendency of the 20th century. The city of the 21st century needs to take the priority on the car and put the priority on the public space to the people. And then we need to revisit all of our zoning in order to integrate the different uses of the city.
Mark, I don't know if you want to complete something about that.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. I mean, I think it's spot on there that I think what has come to the surface over the last year or so is the 15-minute city. This is a city where you can walk within 15 minutes to anything what you want to have, whether it's your work, your shop, your sports facility, your club, whatever you go, everything should be within a 15 minutes walking distance of your home. And I think that's quite an attractive concept because, you know, it gets away from the idea that you need to travel a long way to go somewhere when you rely on other things. But if you can just walk out of your home and go do all these kind of things, I think that would make it a city much more attractive. It's at the moment promoted by the mayor of Paris, Ana Hidalgo. She got a lot of credit for this, but I think if you look actually in Barcelona, there are also centers where this already is happening. And I saw some maps where this is taking place, but I think we could promote it further.
Okay, so I think that we have been talking for a little bit more than half an hour. I think that we have 20 minutes before 7 o'clock. And I think that Nieves, if you want, we can open the chat, and if you have selected some questions, I think that it's time to share with the speakers one or two or three questions. We have 20 minutes, so go on. Thank you.
Sorry, one of the concerns of one of our assistants it was related to the time of displacement and to arrive in hygienic conditions at work. This will be linked with what John has commented right now about bringing the work closer to the residences. How we can manage it right now, or how we can do it. John, maybe you can start.
Yeah, I think that that has been some studies about the commuting time. And commuting time is becoming awful in several sprawl cities in the world. where you need 1 hour, 2 hours, or even more to reach your workplace. I think that this needs to be, challenged and changed in order to improve the quality of life. And of course, that needs a huge effort in urban planning. And then after urban planning, you need also a very important exercise in providing public massive transport, which is efficient, rapid, and convenient, and whatever. I think that this is a crucial destiny of our urbanization in the forthcoming years, cutting the commuting time. And remember that the commuting time is affecting more the poor people, okay? Because the rich people, they can find different manners to reach the workplace, including helicopter if necessary. But the people with low salaries of less than $2,000 or $1,000, those are the people that, as they cannot live nearby the job, they live away, and therefore there's an inequality written down the issue of commuting time. Then this belongs to the, let's say, to the field of right to the proper city, the right to live in a well-designed place, in order to diminish these huge inequalities.
I don't know if you want to add something.
No, it's fine.
Mark? Okay. Next question is about how to design the transport, public transport exchangers, the intercambiadores de transporte, to make the people don't to be agglomerated there. Maybe you can ask this question, Mark.
Yeah, so, public transport has a lot of challenges at the moment. People stay away from it. And I think what we tend to see is that, public transport before the crisis was very popular. So you get a lot of people using it for getting around. And that gives a lot of people where people are interchanges, where you get a lot of people waiting, having to hang around, etc., which you can't do anymore. I mean, I call it more the public transport system for sardinas in a way that, and I think we don't want to go back to that. So that means that we need to increase the capacity of the public transport, get more services going, trains, buses, particularly electric ones, I think, rather than the diesel ones. And create more space on the public transport system so that people can use it more. Also, I think perhaps we need to have some changes in attitudes when we start work. I mean, typically public transport systems get overloaded in the morning, 8 o'clock people start, 9 o'clock, it's completely full. I mean, it's very difficult. And perhaps we need to think a bit more about flexible working patterns so that we can spread the working patterns more over the morning, and that some people start a bit earlier, some people start a bit later, so you don't overload the public transport system. But it's, you can have it busy or considerably busy throughout the day. I mean, what we see now is also that teleworking, working at home has become more popular because you have to, and perhaps we can build that in a bit more as well, that 1 day per week we work at home. I mean, so also that reduces a bit the pressure on the public transport system. So I think we need to look at different ways to try to manage more, make it more attractive for people, get more people on, but spread them around over time. And this takes some adjustment, and as what I say, we need to increase the capacity. I know for many places in the metropolitan area, it's very hard to get, say, to work in Barcelona if you work in Barcelona, so we need to think about that. But then also what Joan was saying before, for example, we need to think more about where is work taking place. We need to have much more mixed land use, what we call, that people don't have to travel so far. I mean, and also thinking for companies, if they place themselves somewhere, not all on top of each other, but perhaps getting around a little bit. And nowadays it's much easier to be in contact with others through the internet and through video camera. And so video llamadas, you don't have to be always right on top of each other to have this benefits of density. So we need to rethink that a little bit. But as what you see here in Barcelona, I think it's on a metropolitan scale where we need to think about, not only on the Barcelona scale.
Okay. Next concern is about tourism. How can we manage tourism to make it a healthy tourist city? And how can we live together health and tourism? Maybe Joan, you can start.
Yeah, I think that the economy of visitors, that is the new name for tourism, in order to to take away the bad reputation linked to the tourism wording. The economies of visitors is going to be, it's already very important in the worldwide economy, and it's going to increase its relevance. The capacity to visit other parts of the world, it's something that our civilization has achieved in the last, let's say, 50 years, and the people is not going to resign this huge achievement in humanity. Then the World Tourism Organization is already predicting that the the number of abroad visitors in the world is going to increase quite in a significant manner in the forthcoming years. This can represent a challenge to the cities and also a challenge to the environment. And then we need to address the two challenges. The challenges to the cities in order to design better circuits, better places to distribute the tourism in a manner that doesn't collapse the city. And the second question, the second of the environmental challenge, all the transport or mobility related to tourism and visitors needs to be decarbonized. And this is a huge effort which will require a lot of attention. But the good news is that more or less the technologies are already here. We can already address the mobility of vessels and ships with clean energy through hydrogen or through other means. Then the remaining, then of course we can go to the buses and trucks, electric buses of different manners, and we can also go advance very rapidly in aviation. But that needs a huge commitment of the public authorities. This is a question of designing a robust regulation what puts in place that with the issue of the environmental challenge of international mobility. You know, in comparison to the economic and social and cultural advantages of international mobility, the cost of addressing the issues of the means of transportation is nearly irrelevant. You know, it's going to be a pity that because we are not able to address the question of fossil fuels in planes or ships, then we are not going to travel anymore in the world. You know, this is an absolutely rational approach to history. Then what we need is to accelerate the technology change in the energy equation of the transportation business.
Do you want to add something, Mark?
Yeah, no, I fully agree. And I think, you know, they're talking about a lot about financial stimulus packages at the moment in many different countries. And we just need to make sure if they're going to be invested, they're going to be invested in you know, not in fossil fuels again, but in carbon-free technologies. I mean, and you know, most of the time it just comes down to investment. If we decide we're going to invest in something what doesn't is not harmful to our environment, to climate, to health, we can do that. But it's a political decision, I think, that needs to be taken, and we need to prioritize that. It's going to cost money, but everything is going to cost money. Whatever way we look at it. I mean, if you keep investing in fossil fuels, there are many externalities that cost us a lot of money that are not taken into account at the moment. And I think we need to look at it a bit more holistically in this way, and provide a good economic basis to do it. But I think it certainly is there. And when the money becomes free from the stimulus packages, let's invest it in a proper way that is good for all of us.
Thank you.
Sorry, Nieves, because I would like to ask a question that I've been thinking about it, because we have been talking about mobility, about tourism, about economies of agglomeration, and now I think that we have to talk a little bit of the inequalities inside cities, because I think that the pandemic has demonstrated that the health of each other, it doesn't depend only of each other, but also from the health of the others. I mean, the health of one person also depends on the good health of the others. And that thing, I think that it's important to know do you think that the social segregation and the growing inequalities inside the cities, and the distribution of wealth determines also the impact of COVID in different levels inside cities. And the problem possibly is not the problem to be living in dense cities, but also in some kind of dense cities and some kinds of neighborhoods, and the inequalities can deep and do the thing worst. What do you think about that?
Yeah. I think what you see at the moment is that, unfortunately, the poorer population within cities has been hit much harder with COVID than the richer ones. I mean, it comes back to this idea that, you know, poorer people need to go out. They had to still work. They had to use, say, public transport or other means to get around. They were at much higher risk of getting the virus than the richer population that actually could be at home, do the teleworking, be isolated from the rest. I think it's also what Joan mentioned before, is that, you know, the poorer population generally lives further away from work, has to do more commuting time. And I think it comes back to this idea again that we need to look more at mixed land use, not only, you know, in terms only for the rich, but also for poorer people. I mean, that, you know, you need the services. I mean, many people that are a bit better off, like me, I've got a cleaner that comes in. My cleaner has to travel a little bit. I mean, why can't the cleaner live a bit closer to my neighborhood and afford it as well? I mean, there are also around, but I mean, just to give this idea that you need to have also the services. I mean, the restaurants, I mean, a lot of the restaurant personnel don't get paid much and they need to travel a long way. I think it's important to realize also that, you know, how much you earn, your social economic status determines your health. And what we see already before the COVID crisis, that there's almost generally a 10 years difference in life expectancy between the poorest and the richest people in the city. And we see that throughout the world, and sometimes it's even larger. And so, you know, your economic position very much determines your life expectancy, what is a bit unfortunate and I think can be addressed. I mean, we should make sure that this kind of inequality should decrease in the future.
Yeah, I think that this is extremely important, and I agree fully with Marc. There's also a change of paradigm here, because in the past, we were used to think that extreme poverty was in rural areas, with people have just existential economies. But now this is not the case. Now we have what we call the new urban poverty. The poorest people of the poor are in the cities. And they tend to concentrate in the cities because the spillovers of the city is bigger than the spillover of the urban or the rural areas. And therefore you congregate the poor people also in the cities. And then that means not only the rich. You have neighborhoods where you see this kind of life expectancy differences that you don't see in the rural areas, by the way, in most of them. Then here, studies of public health and epidemiology are needed to understand the new physical distribution of poverty. Because, for example, with the current debate about España vaciada and this kind of always permanent debate of rural versus urban life, it seems that we have put already too much money on the cities and we have not put money in the rural areas, which is not the case. Okay? If we correct by need, we have huge neighborhoods in the big cities, and well, in Europe you don't see that because we have you don't see that as much as you see in Africa or in Latin America, but in Europe, because we have the welfare state and the pension systems help to a little bit at least to re-equilibrate the wealth. But even though the poor of the poor are living in the city now. And therefore you need to invest on these neighborhoods inside the city. And this is something that is not well understood by many politicians. And it's not understood because our electoral system gives a prima, how you said that in English, gives a surplus to the rural votes. Then all the political parties are interested on achieving good results in the rural areas because with less voters, you have more deputies, more members of parliament. And then it's a coalition of politics to invest more in rural areas where you can achieve high levels of quality of life. And then forgot about the difficult neighborhoods of the main cities. And this is something that public health specialists and urbanists needs to remember. You know, you remember the Plan Cerdà. The Plan Cerdà had it had a note, it had an appendix, which was called the social conditions of the Barcelona laborers. Then the main reason of the Cerdà plan was to achieve the health for the crowded people of the old town. He was a leftist. Cerdà was a liberal from the something called the National Militia, which was an organization of the liberal left of Spain in the 19th century. And he had on its mind mainly the issue of, you know, quality of life for everybody, not just for the rich. Therefore, I think that all these issues stay with us with COVID or without COVID. And those are much more difficult to address than the COVID.
Thank you very much, Nieves. Thank you for managing the chat because now it's 7 o'clock. So I don't know if you want to add something, Mark, to end quickly, or we can end as you want. I mean, if you want to say something to close, or as you want.
Yeah. So for me, it's cities are great places. I mean, they're great attractions. I mean, lots of innovation, wealth creation taking place. But I think we still can improve them in terms of sustainability, livability, and health. And I think we all need to work together to go this way. And personally, I believe a lot in more kind of quantitative impact assessments to see, you know, what is better, what is not. And I hope that we can stimulate this in the future to improve our cities even further and make them even nicer places to live for people.
Okay, so thank you very much, Joan and Mark, for
Thank
your
you.
contributions, and thank you for the audience to be here with us. And before ending the session, I would like to announce the next session that is, it's on the calendar for the 15th of June, next week at 12 o'clock. It will be in Catalan, and we are going to talk about cities and freight transport with Joan Font, that is the president and the CEO of Grup Bonpreu. Grup Bonpreu is the 35th company in Catalonia by turnover ranking, so it's an important company, and a company that has suffered the pandemic in his sector, and with Ignasi Ragaz, that is an economist, expert in transport and urban development. So thank you very much, and see you soon, and welcome on board. And I think that we will have more opportunities to share your contributions. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye.